Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Life in Motion. I'm your host, Grace Becker. I'm a licensed mental health therapist and enthusiast of life. And today I am joined by my colleague, John Lyon, who was also my supervisor when I was interning to receive my license. So I'm really excited to have you here today, John. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.
John is a licensed independent clinical social worker. He provides therapy to a range of clients. He offers specific strategies to help people overcome problems, provide support. He specializes in many areas. He specializes in anger management, relationship issues, anxiety management, depression, PTSD, non-consensual or consensual non-monogamy. Oh my gosh, that'd be so bad.
Non-consensual is a completely other thing.
Non-consensual non-monogamy, consensual non-monogamy, attachment theory. He's kind of a jack of all trades. He is client-centered, very well versed in both clinical techniques like EMDR for PTSD, and also very well versed in psychoeducation techniques. So yeah, very excited to have John on today. He's a wealth of information. So thanks again for joining me. How are you doing today, John?
I'm doing pretty good. It's Friday, so
It is Friday as we're recording this, and the weather's really nice right now.
a happy Pi
Um,
Day to everyone.
oh, is today National Pie Day?
Well, it's 3.14, so it's Pi Day.
I didn't even realize. Dang, I missed out on the opportunity to tell that to all my clients
Yeah,
today.
yeah. There's a joke in the poly community that love isn't cake that you can split up. Love is more like pie. It's irrational and unending.
Oh, I kind of love that. Like the pie, the like number
Yeah,
sequence. Yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh, that's a good analogy. I might have to steal that.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I am really excited for this topic that we're going to be discussing today. Today, John and I are going to be diving into polyamorous relationships, what it is. We're going to be talking about what if love wasn't limited to just one person? What if relationships could be redefined? So today we'll be diving into polyamory, the reality, the challenges, and the myths. So yeah, okay. John,
Excellent.
just to get started, do you want to tell us a little bit about what your experience with this topic we're discussing today is?
Well, I've been non-monogamous for 14, 16 years, something like that. I haven't dated a lot of people, but I have dated some. And my partners have multiple partners, and like I know a lot of poly people. I've also done some work with poly clients and like helping folks sort of figure out how to make this work because it's terribly complicated sometimes.
Yes, it can be very complicated, and I imagine it has some more specific detail to it compared to something like an open relationship.
So Jessica Fern in her book Polysecure does a really good job of like defining non-monogamous relationships, and she
Hmm.
talks about sort of like two different axes to understand them. And the
Hmm.
first is emotional availability, and the second is sexual openness. So emotional openness and sexual openness.
Hmm.
And what you get is there's a whole bunch of different kinds of non-monogamy.
Hmm.
So, or well, actually more relationships, right? So if you're in a relationship with high sexual exclusivity and high emotional exclusivity, that's
Hmm.
that's monogamy land, right? You're not going to sleep with anyone but me. You're not going to love anyone
Hmm.
but me.
Yeah.
And then, poly ends up being sort of this big blob in the middle. But, swingers are on this group. And swingers are high sexual availability. So they'll have lots of sexual partners, but they
Hmm.
don't share emotions.
Okay, so you would consider swingers in kind of the umbrella of polyamory then?
Um,
Or
they're
under the
they're
umbrella
they're
of
a flavor of
non-monogamy?
non-monogamy.
Okay, okay, that makes more sense then because I always kind of viewed them a little bit differently. So under the umbrella of non-monogamy.
Yeah, and
Okay.
and you have people like relationship anarchy folks who kind of believe that every relationship needs to be individually defined.
Yeah.
And so they don't necessarily differentiate between a romantic partner and a friend. It is those relationships are whatever they are. So
Right.
they have a lot of they're not exclusive both sexually and emotionally.
Okay.
And so
Because because
if you kind of
polyamory is essentially like consensual, ethical non-monogamy, and from what I understand, polyamory, there's different what are they called, fidelities, like there's different types of fidelities where there's emotional fidelity, physical fidelity, spiritual, intellectual, different ways of connecting to people. And in polyamory you could have like a emotional fidelity with someone where it's mostly just that connection and the way you communicate, and then you can also have physical fidelity where it's mostly physical connection, right?
um
Does that
I
sound
sort of that feels like trying to change a carburetor through the tailpipe.
okay? Can you explain kind of more about polyamory?
So when we're talking about monogamy, right, there's sort of four different flavors of monogamy. There's
Okay.
sexual exclusivity, that you say you're not going to sleep with anyone. Now, when I'm working with couples, one of the things that we have to talk about is what counts as sex, right? Does
Mm-hmm.
holding someone's hand count as sex? Does kissing count as sex? Like, where's the line?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to talk about sexual exclusivity. We have to talk about emotional exclusivity, right? In a monogamous relationship, the assumption is that you're not going to share your feelings with anyone except your romantic partner.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's behavioral monogamy, where like you have some behaviors that are just for the couple. There's
Mm-hmm.
some TV shows that if I watch them without my wife, she's going to be pissed because we're watching that show together, right?
Right.
And then there's social monogamy, which is that you present to the world as a couple. You know, if I win a cruise for two, my wife would be the person I would bring with, right?
Right.
Now, non-monogamists start looking at those four things and going, well, where does the line have to be? Where do I
Mm-hmm.
want the line to be?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Swingers go, yeah, no, sex, you can have sex with whoever you want, but don't fall in love with anyone but me.
Mm-hmm. Which
Um,
I imagine can sometimes be difficult to manage in a polyamorous relationship.
um, well, it kind of depends, right?
Mm-hmm.
For swingers, they've set these sets of boundaries about where their lines are. For
Mm-hmm.
folks who tend to call themselves polyamorous or poly,
Mm-hmm.
they tend to be a lot more like, yes, you're going to have feelings for this person. That's important. That's part of the process. It would be
Mm-hmm.
weird for you to have sex with someone but not actually care about them.
Yeah.
Um, and that can be hard, right? You know, watching your partner fall in love with someone else and go through the sort of puppy love and the
Mm-hmm.
infatuation, that can be really hard. It can trigger a lot of
Mm-hmm.
insecurity, a lot of doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and it can be easy when you're the person falling in love with someone to, you know, your brain's thinking about that other person all the time. And, you know, are you neglecting your other partner or other partners, plural?
Right. Yeah. And I believe Jessica Fern also talked about this in her book as well, about how you need to have a secure attachment, a
Hmm.
secure relationship with your partner to be able to transition into having other partners in whatever way that is showing up for people in the way they decide to have relationships with other people. But you have to have the secure attachment before you can continue. Otherwise, I imagine that would lead to some
Uh,
issues down the road.
that so one of the things when we talk about the poly community as a whole,
Hmm.
there are a lot of different folks in the poly community, and it is broad.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I will say that demographically, it is overwhelmingly white.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot of people of color in the poly community for, I do not know the reason, but they tend to
Mm-hmm.
not be doing this. Um,
Interesting.
yeah,
Interesting
but
to
you
know.
know,
Yeah.
the history of non-monogamy is like as old as human beings. So, like, this is not particularly new stuff. The current incarnation maybe is, but like I found when my supervisor, the person who trained me, retired,
Mm-hmm.
I inherited her collection of books, and in it was a relationship book that talked about key parties in World War II.
Oh, very, yeah. So that's been going on
Yeah, it's been
since
going
at least
on.
World War II,
Yeah, and
even
before that, like,
even
and
longer.
and the authors then talked about, like, part of the purpose of this was that these men were going off to war, and they wanted someone that
Right.
their wife knew and cared about in case they didn't come back to be there for them.
Mm. At that time, do you know when you were doing your reading and your research, would they call it polyamory or non-monogamy?
Now, polyamory was a term that was coined in the 70s, I want to say.
Okay, so much later that term
Yeah,
came
yeah.
around. Okay.
Um, because polyamory is sort of an abomination to people who really love words,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a mixing of Greek and Latin, I believe.
Okay.
Um, so it should be something else. I don't remember exactly it, like, but that's another one of these jokes that flies around the poly community. It's it should be this or it should be that. Like, I forget what the joke is, but there's a
It's
joke
okay.
there.
Okay, there's some joke there with that. Okay, so it's for as much as we know, it's polyamory has been around for a long time, long before World War II, and so it's something that even if people were unconsciously doing it, I don't know if you would consider it unconscious, but the like you were saying, the men were going off to war.
Yeah,
They wanted their wife to be able to have someone to provide or to comfort them. Um, that must have been hard to do, especially if it's something that wasn't really discussed before they would leave.
there's a lot of societal stuff involved in how relationships get
Hmm.
structured. There's an anthropologist somewhere who's just having a blast, going, "You guys are getting this wrong." Like, because human beings have structured their relationships is a complex interweave of the environment, their technological foundation, religious traditions, the environment that they're living in. Like, all of those things play a part in determining
Hmm.
what kind of social group makes sense. I want to
Right.
say it's in the Andes where
Okay.
polyandry is super common.
Oh, polyandry.
Polyandry, and so polyandry is where the woman has multiple husbands,
Hmm.
where their sister.
So what are some reasons that people would consider going into polyamory?
Well, it's for a lot of people, it's not like buying a car. It's sort of an expression of
Hmm.
who you are. I
Yeah.
know I am a way happier and more stable human being when I have multiple partners.
Hmm.
Like, if you ask me the reason for that, I have
Yeah.
no idea. Like, I don't know why I am that way. I just am.
Yeah.
When I
Would you feel comfortable like sharing maybe when or like how you realize, you know what, this is something I've heard of, this is something I think I would be interested in trying.
That was not the way I ended up here.
Okay.
So what my story involves, like, flirting with a friend and her and I talking through, I think it was Yahoo chat at the time. Like, this was
Hmm.
long, long ago in the distant past. And both of us agreeing about how attractive my wife was. And, like, things just kind of went from there. I had never heard of poly. None of
Hmm.
us had heard what poly was. We didn't know what the hell we were doing. And so
Hmm.
we made a lot of mistakes. We stumbled. I did a lot of things that, like, in retrospect, I go, that was shitty of me. Like,
Hmm.
I did not do a good by these people.
Hmm.
And so there was a lot of learning and growing and researching to sort of figure out what the heck is going on, what we were doing.
Right.
But yeah, at the time, no idea.
No, yeah.
But
So it was an after fact of it wasn't you did all this research and then you sought it out. It was more so you had this experience with your friend, your wife,
yeah,
and then you researched it. Okay. Yeah.
and kind of went, oh, I feel much better as a person. Like, I feel whole. Like,
Right.
I feel understood. I feel secure.
Hmm.
And when that relationship eventually ended, things got kind of hard for me for a while. Because again, having like this sounds weird to some people, but like only having one partner was hard for me.
Mm-hmm.
Right, my wife loved me and cared about me, but that was not quite enough.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nothing negative about my wife. She's a fantastic human being. I love her to death. Bicycles need two wheels.
Yeah, yeah. Would you say that, like you were saying, you love your wife and I mean, you're married to her for a reason.
Yeah.
Um, is it, would you describe it as not that she's lacking something, but there's something that your partner provides that your wife doesn't provide, or maybe it's she's not always able to provide what you
No,
need?
so if you ask me, is there something my wife isn't providing? No. The only thing I can say she doesn't provide is she's not my girlfriend, right? They're two different people, and they're both lovely and special in unique and
Mm-hmm.
individual ways. And I care about them because of who they are as human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife cannot be my girlfriend. My girlfriend cannot be my wife.
Okay, so it's not that one or the other isn't providing you something, it's just the fact that they both are great humans and they give you more.
Yeah,
More, they
more.
add to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Could you explain more about, I think we've talked about a few times, like primary, secondary. Can you explain what those terms mean and how that is a part of polyamory?
So some people will use those terms, and those terms sometimes end up meaning slightly different things depending on who's saying it.
Okay.
So primary typically is being used in terms hierarchical polyamory, where a person will have a partner that is their first priority, right? So in my
Okay.
case, we would say, oh, your wife is your primary, and your girlfriend is your secondary partner. And
Okay.
people in hierarchical polyamory will use that as an excuse is maybe the best word. Use that as an excuse to change how they deal with people. I don't tend to do that. I don't like you doing that because it feels really dehumanizing to say, "I'm sorry, girlfriend, you drew the short straw. You're not quite as good as my other partner."
Right. Yeah.
Um, so oftentimes people use like primary and secondary, not in terms of a hierarchy, but in terms of like my wife is my nesting partner. I live with her. I
Hmm.
own property with her. My
Yes.
girlfriend lives in Minneapolis. She has her own apartment, and we're not financially entangled in any way. We don't have children together.
Would you say that nesting partner and primary could be interchangeable for some people,
They,
or
they can be interchangeable for some people, and for some people, not so much.
yeah. Would it be possible, like for some people, their, secondary partner, if they use that to describe their relationship, could also be their nesting partner?
Possibly, yeah.
Is
Like
that more rare?
that I think is more rare, but it's
Okay.
one of the things about the poly sort of world is that it really is a place of people defining their relationships for what exactly that relationship is. So it tends to be really idiosyncratic.
Okay.
So like I have heard of people who like they couple gets married, they have kids, they kind of go, you know what, this is not like I like you and we make good parents, but I just and so like they continue living together, but they have other romantic relationships and
Mm-hmm.
like are they romantically entwined? Maybe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like traditional monogamy land says, well, if you don't love each other, you need to get divorced and like separate your
Mm-hmm.
houses. Like, and it demands a whole bunch of
Yeah,
unpleasantness.
it does. Yes.
And that's one of the things I love about non-monogamy land is you get to define however whatever works for you guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if parents are
Yeah.
like, you know what, we don't want to sleep together anymore, or like one of my friends, they transitioned. He's
Mm-hmm.
now a she. She is
Mm-hmm.
not interested in it. Her wife is not interested in women, and like so I honestly don't know what their relationship is
Mm-hmm.
because it's not my damn business.
Yeah. 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 Well,
But
and go ahead. Yeah.
like they have defined their relationship in such a way that they're able to stay together for their child,
Mm-hmm.
and however that works, like none of my
Mm-hmm.
business.
Right.
But
That
monogamy
that
land would not allow that.
yes, and that is something that I know that polyamory is something that's really beautiful about polyamory or just non-monogamy is that you can define for yourself what you want your relationships to look like,
Yeah.
especially if you bring kids into the picture too, right? I've also heard the term anchor partner before. How does that play a role into this?
Um, so anchor partner is another sort of like nesting partner. It's the person who's really important and close to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes people who like maybe they don't actually live with anyone, but they have one partner who's really close and important to them, and they have other partners who are a bit more sort of occasional.
Okay.
Like my girlfriend has a partner that she refers to as a comet,
As a
and
what?
a comet.
A comment.
Yes, so a comet
Okay.
is someone who sort of like they show up, there's a bunch of fiery stuff, and then it just goes off into the dark, and it'll
Okay.
orbit around again.
Yep, like a comment. Okay, I get it.
Yeah, yeah. So like she's got a guy that she's
Mm-hmm.
been talking to, um, thousands of miles away,
Okay.
and so like she'll get together, she'll see him like once maybe twice a year. They have a good
Mm-hmm.
time.
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect as well, is that you can have partners that maybe you don't necessarily see each other face to face that are over the phone relationships.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I as a therapist, I've worked with I don't know how many men, occasionally women, but often it's men, who have troubles with infidelity because they were having internet conversations with other women or with other men or with, you know, and sometimes those conversations aren't even sexual in nature.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I tell people on a fairly regular basis is that the problem with infidelity isn't the sex. The problem is the secrets, the lies, the cheating, the hiding of things. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what separates non-monogamy stuff from cheating. Cheating is hiding stuff, and it doesn't matter what the hell you're hiding.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if you're hiding that you're having sex with someone or that you're having, you know, talking sexy with someone or
Mm-hmm.
that you're gambling on a Russian, website. Like it doesn't matter what
Mm-hmm.
you're hiding. It's the things
Mm-hmm.
that you're hiding are the problem.
It's the fact that you're hiding.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that kind of comes back to the secure attachment that you have to have, or just the open communication more so too.
Yep. Yep.
You have to openly communicate what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what you're needing. And if there is something that comes up that's an issue for you. I know some people who have considered going into polyamory, and one of the biggest things that we've talked about is making sure that you have that open communication with your partner, kind of setting a like foundations agreement for how
hmm
this is going to go.
In my experience and sort of like reading and all this stuff, having plans for how you're going to handle a non-monogamous relationship is super cool.
Hmm.
And it's no good plan survives contact with the enemy. One of the sort of rules of combat is that like you make a plan, and then when
Hmm.
you actually start fighting, the other guy does stuff, and you just have to make it up,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, you can't
Having
plan for everything. You
You
can't
can't plan
prepare for
for
everything.
everything,
Yeah.
and when this is part of what makes me personally kind of like dubious when I meet swingers,
Yeah.
because swingers will have this like, okay, so here are the rules, here's what we're going to do, and that works great until you start catching feelings for someone,
Hmm.
and developing emotional connections is kind of hardwired into how the human brain works,
Right.
and
Right.
so
Yeah.
it's hard to
Hmm.
not develop
Hmm.
feelings for people when you're having sex with them.
Yeah. I mean, people are designed to crave connection with other humans.
Yeah,
So when you are especially getting that physical contact with them, it's natural to also want that emotional connection too.
yeah.
Yeah, okay. Something else that I've learned with polyamory is that there's times when you can open your polyamory relationship or polyamorous relationship
Mhm.
to accepting more partners, and when you can close it for like, okay, not looking anymore.
Yeah.
Would you say that that is something that is typically an individual decision? So say for example, right, like you decided that you were ready to open to find new partners and you communicated it with your wife and your girlfriend, and you go and you do that. And when you also want to close it. Or is it more a group decision of, okay, all of us are now, we're open, everybody's open, or everybody's closed?
Um, so it works both ways,
Hmm.
but it doesn't work both ways.
Clear as mud.
So do people do things both of the ways you described? Yeah, people do that.
Yeah.
But trying to, okay, we're going to open as a group doesn't actually work because that's
Hmm.
not the way people work, right? Like I
Hmm.
make decisions for me, I cannot make decisions for you.
Hmm.
And so when I was in a like, okay, I'm gonna start trying to date again. I talked to my wife, said, here's what I'm thinking, here's what the plan
Hmm.
is. What do you think about that? I wasn't asking her permission.
Not her permission, but more so her like thoughts on the topic.
Yeah, her thoughts on the topic. Like I wanted her to be
Hmm.
informed. I
Yeah.
wanted to hear if she had some anxiety so we could address that. Like, but she wasn't giving me permission. Just like when my girlfriend started talking to this new guy. She tells me like, "Hey, I'm talking to this new guy." I'm thinking like, and like, did that make me a little insecure? Yeah, I didn't get a vote. I told her like I'm feeling a little insecure about that. We talked about it, we dealt with it, but
Yeah.
she gets
So,
to choose for her.
right. I'm curious too, when that happens, what if it were the case where you were to have said, actually, that makes me very uncomfortable? Would she then like shut it down with this other partner until that the two of you were able to communicate that, or would she continue on with that other partner while also figuring out how this like dynamic plays a role in your connection with her?
So you remember I talked about in my first poly relationship, I made a lot of mistakes.
Mhm.
What you just described was one of those mistakes where my wife was feeling anxious, and so we'd go through these cycles where in order to deal with her anxiety I would break up with my girlfriend, which
Mhm.
would be terribly hurtful to my girlfriend
Mhm.
because it was hurtful to me because I didn't want to end that relationship,
Mhm.
but I was doing it to avoid the conflict.
Right.
And things wouldn't necessarily get better because you can't work through the anxiety and the insecurity when the cause of that insecurity isn't there.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so, my wife would feel a little bit better, or I'd feel like I can't take this anymore, and I'd start back up the
Mhm.
relationship. And like it was just the spiral,
Mhm.
right? One
Yeah.
of the things part of what makes poly hard is in order for it to really function well, you have to take full responsibility for your feelings.
Mhm.
Right? When I told my girlfriend I was feeling insecure about her dating a new guy,
Mhm.
that had to come with, I don't get you, like you keep doing your thing, right? I
Mhm.
need to deal with my feelings. They are my feelings and my problem. I
Right.
might say, I want to make sure that we're chatting. I want to make sure that I don't lose you, right? I'm
Mhm.
worried about those things. I have to talk about my stuff, but I don't get to say anything about what she does.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's important to communicate that so that it can be addressed. Because if you were to just, oh, like maybe it'll go away, like these thoughts or these feelings, but really, if it bothers you after like 24 hours, speak up within 48 hours
Yep.
because it's probably not going to go away, and it's better to get it out and to communicate it rather than maybe having resentment later.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, a lot of people I tell poly relationships is sort of like relationship grad school,
Mm.
right? Like you're doing some advanced work. This requires some attention, some effort. It you grow as a person, right? You do
Mhm.
hard things, you get better.
Mhm.
You become a better person,
Mhm.
right? Am I better at
Yeah.
managing my feelings than I was when I was monogamous? think so.
Because also you're a therapist, so that probably helps a lot in you communicating with your partners. I almost wonder too if that's a misunderstanding, a misconception for polyamory people is that just because they're polyamorous doesn't mean that they don't become insecure sometimes.
Oh, right.
Doesn't mean that they have these irrational thoughts. I'm sure it happens all the time. It's just the way they go about communicating it
Absolutely,
is very
absolutely.
different. Yeah. I would even argue that many of the polyamory people that I have met are better at communicating because they have to be so aware and so open all the time compared
Yeah.
to monogamous people.
Yeah, it's a skill. Communication is a
Yeah.
skill. The more you practice it, the better you get at it. The harder the things you try to do, the more
Yeah.
skill you develop. You
Yeah,
know,
absolutely.
and part of what makes my relationship with my wife so powerful is how deep the trust we have established is. Like one of the stories I tell sometimes is um, my wife asked me at one point, "Hey John, do you think that person over there is cute?" And like I swear, Admiral Akbar showed up on my shoulder and it's like, "It's a trap." And
Don't trust
and
it.
and I went, "Okay, John, we said we're going to be honest. We're going to talk about what we're thinking, what we're feeling. We're not gonna like we're just gonna say it." So I took a deep breath and I said, "Yes, yes, I think she's very cute." And my
Yeah.
wife kind of went, "Yeah, I thought you'd like her," and like just toddled off.
She's like, let me go get her number or something?
Not not that, but
Oh,
close
okay,
enough.
okay, okay. When you said you said like toddled off, I was like, oh shit.
We were at home, just the two of us talking. She didn't
Oh,
go to
okay.
hit on someone for me, no.
I was like, whoa, makes it easier for you.
But it was the wow, I really can talk to my wife about literally anything. And having that the security that no, I really
Hmm.
can. And I know that because I've stress tested it, right? This isn't something
Oh,
that like I just have to take on faith. I have evidence that we can talk about super hard things and that we're going to be okay.
yeah. And you don't just get there overnight. Like you
No,
didn't get to where you are overnight. And
years.
yes, and it takes like slow vulnerability, slow exposure
Yeah,
to different like situations and like you were saying, like different stress tests, basically. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's.
Okay.
I remember when we were in the process of sort of working through understanding Polly and sort of building that. Like we'd have these. She'd always want to talk at like 10 o'clock at night when we'd crawl into bed, and I was like, I am tired, lady. Like, come on.
Yeah.
And but I was like, I'm gonna stick through this. I'm gonna do this conversation. I'm gonna talk about the hard stuff. And
Hmm.
we talked for like an hour or more. And like I almost never fell asleep while we were having those conversations.
I bet they were hard
They were
conversations.
hard conversations. And often the conversations, like the superficial stuff, like what we
Hmm.
were talking about, was the same stuff. Right? So we kept having the same conversation over and over again. Right? And there's a part of me that was like, oh, for God's sake, look, I love you, lady. Like stop. But she was working through that trust process, and so
Yeah.
that she needed to know that I would sit there and have a conversation with her,
Hmm.
even when I was upset or tired or bored or all three,
Hmm.
and I wouldn't go away and I'd listen to her the whole
Hmm.
time. And she
Yeah.
needed to know that not just like in her head, she needed to know that way deep down.
Hmm.
And you only get to that way deep down by doing it over and over and over and over and over and
Hmm.
over.
Showing up, reassuring.
Yeah.
That's part of how you build that trust and that security.
So there's a fantastic quote from Jessica Fern that I
Hmm.
dearly love, um, and she's talking about um, how like the idea of having rules in a relationship, um,
Okay.
and she says that relying too much on the structure of the relationship to ensure and safeguard secure attachment instead of the quality of relating between partners to forge secure attachment. So rules instead of like trusting your partner.
Yeah.
When we rely on the structure of our relationship, whether that's through practice being monogamous with someone or practicing hierarchical forms of consensual non-monogamy, we run the risk of forgetting that secure attachment is an embodied expression built upon how we consistently respond and attune to each other, not something that gets created through structure and hierarchy.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, right? Like when I was
Wow.
reading her book, that was like I hit a brick wall.
Yeah. I would have to reread it multiple times. Okay, so part of I think, and correct me if I'm misunderstanding, that part of it is saying that you can't solely rely on the structure of your relationship. You have to continuously, like, continuously date, continuously communicate. You have to have the uncomfortable conversations because that is what gets you to where you want to be
So
with your
here's the
partners.
key part for the listeners to pay
Hmm.
attention to. It's an embodied expression, something you feel in your body, built
Hmm.
upon how we consistently respond and attune to each other.
Hmm. So
So when I
turn
was
towards each other.
turned towards each other. So when I was having all of those late night conversations with my wife, right? I was responding to her because I was there. I was going with the conversation and I was attuned. I was like, oh yeah, I can see where you're hurt. I can see where
Hmm.
that's scary, right? I was
Hmm.
picking up her emotions, right, and responding to
Hmm.
them.
Hmm.
And when you do that over and over again, that's what builds the relationship.
Yeah. Because it's not solely about always communicating your perspective, but also knowing when to validate and empathize with your
Yeah.
partner's perspective too.
And I'd say
Yeah.
that's more important really than just
Hmm.
hearing the fact stuff. Like the
Yeah.
emotions are really what drives emotional
Hmm.
relationships.
Absolutely. And just because maybe empathize or, validate certain aspects of someone's perspective doesn't always mean that's your truth. It doesn't have to be your understanding of it. It's
And
more
you
so
don't have to agree with it.
yeah, you don't have to agree. It's just bridging that connection, showing that you do understand what they're
Yeah.
saying and where they could find that, like where they came across with that thought. Yeah. Okay. Would you say that would, I don't know if this would be a good thing to talk about next or if it's something that maybe for a different time because again, like I know this topic is so like extensive and there's a lot here,
There's a
but
huge amount, yeah.
yeah, like a triad, a quad, polycule, do you think that's something that would be helpful to talk about, or would it be
Um,
better to move on to the next, like, I think misconceptions is next, or
okay.
misunderstandings?
Well,
What
we
would
can
you
talk
say?
real briefly. Like in Polyland, there are lots of words people use to describe their relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So you get like metamor, which is the partner of your partner. So
Mm-hmm.
um, my girlfriend is my wife's metamor because they're not in a relationship together, but they're both in a relationship with me. And then like we talk about like a triad is where everyone's all three people are in a relationship together. The polycule is something that you see a lot in sort of poly circles where they're just talking about the network of their relationship. A polycule is just a group of connections, right? So
Mm-hmm.
um, I have my wife, I have my girlfriend. My girlfriend has another partner. She actually has several other partners, and those partners have partners, and like you start drawing out these connections, and I actually don't know all of the people in my polycule. Um, and part of that is because one of the problems that still exists with poly is that for some people it ends up causing problems either politically or in professionally. There's a lot of people who are in the U.S. military and being having multiple partners in the military is seen as a security risk. So if you've got like a secret or top secret clearance, that can cause a lot of issues for folks. Some people work for folks who just are absolutely unwilling to see that as a normal and healthy thing, so they have to hide it. Teachers sometimes that can be an issue.
Yeah. Debunking myths and misconceptions. So, what are some common misunderstandings that you might hear about polyamory?
Well, a lot of people go, like, being poly is just an excuse to cheat, and uh, that really kind of misses the point, I think. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Poly is about building intentional relationships. Um,
Right.
and cheating is about being dishonest, hiding things.
And
Uh,
polyamory is the very opposite of that.
it's
It's
the literal opposite of that.
mm-hmm.
Before I started dating my girlfriend, I talked to my wife and said, "What do you think about this?" And we had a conversation. Um, my girlfriend talked to me about, "I'm thinking about dating this guy. What do you think?" Before she started doing anything. Um, so there's a lot of people who kind of assume that, oh, poly people are just somehow naturally immune to jealousy. Of
Mm-hmm.
course not. We're people. We work through stuff. Um, there was a video that went around where they asked poly people things, and
Mm-hmm.
one of the people they asked was like, "Is every sexual encounter an orgy?" Like,
Like, is it
and,
just an excuse to have an orgy together?
yeah, and like the answer is, well, A, you don't need an excuse. If you want to have an orgy, like just organize that.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah, let's just yeah, get on FetLife, organize something.
have a good time. Like you do
Yep.
you, man. Um, but yeah, most of the time, like the poly people I know, super normal. I sometimes hear people worry about like how do kids interact with this? Like how does this impact kids? And the
Mm-hmm.
answer is it usually doesn't because 99.999% of kids don't care what their parents' sex life is.
Mm-hmm.
So like
Yeah.
if if you want to know what your parents' sex life is, that's weird.
Right. That is very
Yeah.
odd.
So most kids they want to know who's going to pick them up from soccer practice,
Right. They
right? They
just want to
want
know you're gonna be appreciative of them. You're gonna engage with them, play with them.
yeah, and that their parents are happy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if their
Right.
parents are happy and they have multiple partners, kids usually figure that out real quick.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a couple people who have kids and are poly, and the kids are like, I just like that my mom is happy and taken care of. Um,
Mm.
I like that I have people who I know are safe that are available for me when I need people.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tell people that normal is subjective, that normal is whatever you want to make it. So if your normal is a polyamorous relationship with however many partners you have,
Yeah,
then you can teach that to your kid. Like your kid will see that and the way you treat people, right? I,
absolutely.
again, argue that the way you treat people is more important than how many people there are to be treated.
Exactly, exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And there certainly are some researchers who have suggested that like a monogamous like nuclear family is really aberrant in terms of human development, like as a
Mm-hmm.
species. Like that's not something that humans did for almost the entirety of our existence as a species.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's really kind of new, and we're really not very good at it. Um, that human beings are really much we're communal creatures, and that non-monogamy makes a lot more sense for a communal
Mm-hmm.
creature who's going to raise their young in a communal sense than trying to be all individualistic and like I take care of mine and everyone else
Right.
can get screwed.
Yeah, and many cultures do it that way, where the community help upbring the youth, the
Yes.
children.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Another myth that I hear a lot is that polyamory is unstable, doomed to fail, and that it's unsuccessful. But the reality is that it can be successful as long as you are practicing these things that we've been talking about, like the open communication.
Well, I love how people will say that, and like you look at it like Betty, you're on your third marriage.
Yeah.
Like monogamy doesn't have great strikes either, man.
Right. Very hypocritical here. Come on now.
Yeah,
Yes.
yes, people relationships are hard, and poly relationships
Hmm.
are sometimes harder. Um,
Hmm.
but monogamy is no easy shakes either.
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So
Honestly,
like
monogamous relationships could probably take a note or two from polyamorous relationships.
they absolutely can. I taught a class, CEU class, so a class for other professionals, other therapists. And
Hmm.
when I was developing it, one of the sections I wanted to put into it was poly skills for monogamous clients. So, if you're a therapist working with couples, what are some poly skills, skills that polyamorous people have that your
Hmm.
monogamous clients would use? And the
Yeah.
thing as I was doing the research, I went, oh, these are just good communication skills.
Hmm.
Like, like there's nothing
Yes.
magic about what poly people do. There's no secret
Yes.
handbook. It's just good basic communication.
Yeah, and that is the number one thing that I hear when I work with couples is we struggle with communicating. We have communication issues.
I've only heard of one couple who had genuine communication issues, and
Hmm.
it was they met at a science fiction convention, and he spoke English and she only spoke Portuguese.
Hmm.
Like,
Different languages.
yeah, different languages. Like they
Yeah.
started talking because they both spoke Klingon.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh.
like the start of their relationship was built on Klingon, the love language.
The love language.
But like when people tell me, "Oh, we have a hard time communicating," I'm like, "Well, you both clearly speak English." The
Hmm.
problem isn't communication. It's being vulnerable. It's talking about your
Yeah.
feelings. It's
Hmm.
being honest, being transparent.
Hmm.
Those are the problems.
Hmm.
And learning to get people to do that and helping them to be honest and open and vulnerable with their partners is
Hmm.
hard. And that's sort of what poly forces you to do.
Hmm.
If the
Yeah.
poly relationships are going to work, you have to be vulnerable and transparent and honest. And when you get good at that, all of your relationships get better.
Yeah. Wow. And okay, two things. One, I love that it's not like you both speak English. Not a communication issue. I love that.
Good.
And two, that it's also like communication isn't just within romantic relationships. It
Oh
can
yeah,
help you across all sorts of relationships, family, friends, coworkers, whoever, podcast guests. Right?
absolutely.
Everything. Yeah. Okay, wow. Any other myths or common misconceptions you've heard about polyamory?
I don't know that I hear a lot because
Mm-hmm.
I'm either talking to people who are in the poly community
Mm-hmm.
or people who aren't in the poly community. They don't talk to me about this stuff.
I almost wonder, because I know one of the things that can be intimidating for people is just not knowing, period. And the idea of like asking more questions can be intimidating, especially if you're going up to someone asking them their personal experience, because it's like, well,
Yeah.
that's not any of my business. But trying to, you know, understand. That's what books are for. That's what
Uh, There
that's what
there are
research is
books.
for.
There are.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there are tons of podcasts that just talk about poly
Mm-hmm.
issues.
Yeah.
When I was coming to understand what all this was, I listened to a lot of podcasts
Yeah.
on
Any that you'd recommend?
none that I think are still on the air.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
the
Podcasts
Cunning
have
Minx
also
was
been
someone I listened to a lot of her shows. Pedestrian Polyamory was another one that I listened to a lot.
okay.
Uh,
What was the first one?
the Cunning Minx, I forget what
Cutting Minx. Okay. Cutting
Cunning
Minx
Minx.
and pedestrian polyamory.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't think any of either of those have produced episodes in years and years and years.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
Well, if they're still up, you can
yeah,
at
and
least
I'm
go
sure
back and
there's
watch the old ones.
plenty of
Yeah.
other people who have started poly podcasts
Yeah.
and are talking about their experiences and what they're trying to do.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. Well, I know we've kind of touched into this somewhat already, but the emotional and psychological side, um, how would you say polyamory impacts a person's mental health, their self-worth? We talked about attachment styles earlier.
Yeah. Well, I think that part of me wants to reject the idea that polyamorous relationships are somehow different from other relationships.
Mhm.
right? Like you had the question about, well, if love wasn't restricted to one person.
Mhm.
I haven't met anyone who had a kid and said, sorry, hon, I now love the kid. I don't love you anymore, right?
Right.
Human beings are built for lots of loving,
Mhm.
emotionally deep connections.
Yeah. It's just
Polyamory just is a slightly different way of saying, no, you can have sex with people you love and have more than one of those.
mhm. Yeah.
Um,
And it's also okay, I full disclosure did not research
mhm,
this. This is totally pulling this out of my ass, but
not a problem.
um Um, I would imagine that some of that comes from like traditions, like religions, like Christianity, where it's
Yeah,
you only have one person, that's your only person, and really like you can love multiple people. Like that example of your kid, of you loving multiple kids, loving both your partner and your kid is a prime
hmm,
example of how you can love more than one person. It's just the fact that if you bring in sex or you bring in an emotional partner connection, that it becomes taboo for some people.
yeah, and you know what? Monogamy works for some people, and that's
Hmm.
great. Like, good for you. I'm glad it works for
Hmm.
you. It
Hmm.
totally doesn't work for me. And so, like, when we talk about like mental health benefits of polyamory,
Hmm.
it, it's about being living a life that meets your needs and fits who you are.
Hmm.
For some people, poly is a terrible idea.
Mm.
If you know that, good, don't do it.
Yeah.
Like it's the same thing about like being trans, right? If you're
Hmm.
living a life that aligns with who you are on the inside, you'll probably be a lot happier and more functional as a person.
Yeah.
So, like for me, being poly is not a like choice. It's sort of who I am.
Absolutely. It's not something, it's not like some, I don't know if condition, like it's not some illness. It's a part of who you are.
Yeah.
It's how you've always been.
Yeah, and when I only had a single partner, I was not as happy and as productive as I could have been.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes very much sense. Um, how about um is there we talked about how open communication is one of the best ways to help with when people might be comparing themselves or feeling insecure. I also would say that boundary setting is
Oh
important.
yeah.
Can you talk about how people might be able to set boundaries or ways that you've personally or professionally have helped people to set boundaries within a polyamorous relationship?
Um, well, so in general, when I tell people when we're talking about boundaries, boundaries are about what you're going to do, not what the other person does.
Mm-hmm.
This is part of the reason why, when we were talking about rules, that rules in poly relationships are usually a bad idea. Well, rules in relationships are usually a bad idea, right? If I tell my wife, you're not allowed to eat pickles anymore, that that no one would be like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense. People
Mm-hmm.
go, that's dumb, John. Why? She can eat pickles if she
Mm-hmm.
wants,
Yeah,
but
free will. She's her own
yeah,
person.
but there's a lot of people. When if I said, wife, you're not allowed to talk to other men, they'd go, oh, I can understand that. No,
Mm.
that makes
Yeah.
just as little sense as saying she can't have pickles,
Yeah.
right? Now, it might be reasonable for me to say, hun, if you've been eating pickles, I'm not going to kiss you because I don't like the taste of pickles,
Mm-hmm.
right? But that's about what I'm going to do, not what she
Mm-hmm.
does.
Right. You don't have control over what other people do, what other people say. You only
Correct.
have control over yourself. So, what are you going to do if someone does something that violates
Yeah,
your moral or your belief or whatever? In this
yeah,
case, pickles. You don't like the
yeah.
taste of pickles.
And in a monogamous relationship, if someone says, if you're lying to me about what your conversations, if you're lying to me about whether you're having talks with other people, I might
Hmm.
choose to end the relationship. Like, I can't be in a relationship where my partner is unfaithful.
Right.
Um, I have had a situation where I had a pair of swingers come into my office, and when I asked them what the problem was, they told me it was infidelity.
Oh, uh,
Yeah, yeah,
okay.
because they had renegotiated the terms of their relationship,
Uh-huh.
right? So if Bill said, "I want to sleep with that girl over there," he'd ask his wife. She'd say, "Go for it," and he would, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he said, "I want to sleep with that girl over there." She looked at this woman and said, "No, do not put your dick in that. That's crazy." And he went and did it anyway. And he
Mm-hmm.
lied about it.
Mm,
He denied they did it when he had, and like, that's the reason they were in my
mm-hmm.
office.
Right.
Again, it's not the sex, it's the lying, it's the cheating, it's the hiding
Yes.
things.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
when we talk about like boundaries and rules, the boundary of I'm not going to be with someone who is unfaithful is a
Mm-hmm.
boundary. You're not allowed to cheat on me is a rule, and you
Yes.
can't enforce rules.
I feel like we need a moment of silence for that almost, the mic drop. Yeah. Because, and I mean, it makes such perfect sense that you can't control another person, and I would almost argue too that when you put that rule onto them, that's more likely to hurt your relationship with them because you're constricting what they can't do. And like you could just possibly end up hurting yourself because when they break this rule that you created without without setting that boundary with them, um, it's gonna turn back and it's gonna hurt you. So it's okay. How do we set the boundary of I don't have relationships with people who cheat on me, and then leaving that relationship when it no longer works for you?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Any other emotional or psychological aspects to polyamory that is important to highlight?
Well, I think we've kind of already talked about, you know, that it you sort of forces you to grow as a person.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Both in your communication skills and your emotional intelligence.
yeah.
Yes. Okay. Any challenges or relationship dynamics that would be important to bring up? Some of it we've kind of.
Um, the only one that kind of comes to mind is one of the things that can happen is if folks want to open up their relationship, I usually say you probably want to wait till you've sort of been in whatever relationship you're in for a year or two before you start adding new
Mm-hmm.
people.
Mm-hmm.
Because you kind of need some time to feel safe and comfortable in the relationship before you start adding new people.
So as we kind of come to a close here, is there any final like closing thoughts or future for Polly that you would like to bring up?
It does seem to be coming much more popular. Like I'm starting to see more depictions of non-monogamy in like media.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's been a couple of movies, there's been a couple places where it shows up.
Yeah.
And for me, like the core thing about poly is it is about building relationships that fit the people in the relationship. So I get to define my relationship with my wife. The two of us build that relationship together. I get to define the relationship with my girlfriend. She and I build that relationship and define it how in a way that makes sense for the two of us. And I think that, we're talking about a world where everyone is having bespoke stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So having bespoke relationships, relationships that are uniquely built for you, makes a lot of sense to me.
Absolutely. It's like you don't get the foot to fit the shoe, or you don't
Yep,
get the body to fit the clothes. You get the clothes to fit the body. You get the shoe to fit the foot. Just like in this case with relationships and the person, like you build your relationship according to yourself and what your partner consents to, not the other way around.
exactly.
Yeah,
Um,
great.
so like I think the one of the jokes that goes to the poly community is you expect monogamy in this economy?
Oh my gosh. Now I'm considering polyamory because you're so right.
Yeah,
In this
in
economy.
this economy. Like, how the hell am I supposed to make have all of the things, have a
Mm-hmm.
house and a car and health insurance when I can only have me and one other adult?
Mm-hmm. Is that where you can have all of your partners living in the same home? Is that a common thing for
I
polyamorous
I wouldn't say it's common.
people? Okay.
Some people do it.
Some
Uh,
people, yeah.
I know only I think I know one, maybe two triads where it's like three people living together. Um,
Yeah.
Most of the time, that's not the way the people I know sort of organize things.
Right. I've probably seen maybe one or two people in a triad who all live together on social media. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Well, is there any advice or maybe sources that you would recommend for people who are curious about exploring more in polyamory?
So Polysecure is a fantastic book, whether you're interested in poly or not. Um, and part of the reason I really love the book is Jessica Fern does a fantastic job of talking about how attachment styles, attachment theory, trauma, like how all of that works to build and sort of shape your relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you want a good relationship, it's full of really good advice on how to have a good relationship,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of whether it's monogamous or not. So Polysecure is really good. There's a website More Than Two that has a lot of really good information and
Yeah.
stuff on it. Um,
Yeah.
and really, when I was starting down this journey, um, it was hard to find resources.
Mm-hmm.
These days, I'm pretty sure if you put poly into TikTok, you will get all kinds of stuff.
Right.
Um,
Just, yeah, there's all sorts of social media and like ChatGPT, AI, all sorts of things you can find information at.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
just if you're curious, go start Googling.
Okay. Yeah. And in couples therapy, the relationship is the couple. So if you were to have, like, go to couples therapy, go to individual therapy, you're always working on, like take John, like you and your wife, right? Like if
Mhm.
you were to go to couples therapy, your therapist would help you with your relationship, and then they would help you with you and your girlfriend, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not necessarily all three at one time. It's like the relationship you have with the other person. That's essentially the client.
That's the client. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
If you're a poly person and you're struggling in your relationships, making sure that you get a therapist who's poly aware is
Mm-hmm.
probably a good idea because if you're a poly person and you go to a therapist who has no idea what the hell you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
um, that can be really problematic because if you don't want to have to educate your therapist about your
Yes.
lifestyle.
Right. And that
Um,
therapist should never treat the client as their resource.
yeah,
They should always do their own like research and in addition learn what it means for the client. Yeah.
yeah. So, and I want to say that there's a poly professional website out there.
Hmm.
So, like, if you're looking for like poly aware accountants or poly aware dentists, like there's a list
Yeah.
of professionals who have said, yes, I understand what poly is.
Wow. Okay. Yes. Well, thank you. That's always great to have resources for people to go learn more and like seek more if they want. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being on today. It was really great to have you on. Both your professional and your personal experience and expertise are always welcomed. When I wanted to do this episode, I knew exactly who I wanted to have as my guest.
Excellent.
So I'm very glad that you agreed and you were able to join me today. So thank you.
It was my pleasure.
Well, if you liked what you heard today, please leave a review, leave 5 stars, share with your friends, your family, your dentist, your lawyer, your whoever. And you can find Life in Motion on Instagram at life.in.motion24. My TikTok is life_in_motion24. And if you have questions for me or for John or thoughts on this, you can always email that as well to life.motion24@gmail.com. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, embrace the chaos and find the beauty. Bye.